Thanks, everyone. So, hi, everyone, and hello to everyone online who are eating Thai food in their pajamas, I'm sure. But yeah, it's great to be here. A little background about myself and Hockeystick. Some of you may have heard of Hockeystick before through our work with accelerators, angels, VCs, different parts, as Rob was saying, of the ecosystem. I've been an entrepreneur and serial entrepreneur for about 20 years. Been an angel investor, ran a VC fund, and been involved with kind of startups in Canada for 2 decades. So I must like it. And at Hockeystick, really, I think our mission ultimately is that we think that using the power of data, we can help create better companies, better performing companies, and kind of create more Hockeystick growth companies. And if we do that, a lot of people benefit. Obviously, investors benefit if you're investing out there. The whole ecosystem benefits, the whole market benefits. So we're obviously big believers in data. I'm not going to go through all of our products and things. You can look on our website and come talk to me afterwards, because I really want the focus today to be about something we're passionate about, that we're going to launch soon, and that's our open data project. So I think I'm in the right space to kind of provide the first ever kind of sneak peek about that. So I don't know why I wanted to start with this. It's just such a cool article. I don't know if you've read this article in the Star about these reporters who submitted a Freedom of Information Act request to the TTC. And it's kind of just a bit of a PR disaster for the TTC, but it does kind of underline the fact that there's a lot of data out there that I think can benefit society, can benefit those of us in the business community. But this kind of highlights a couple of things for me, which is just because you have the legal right to access data doesn't mean there can't be roadblocks thrown up in your face that make it difficult or impossible to actually get value from it. For example, somebody sending you a $32,000 bill, that's a pretty big roadblock, and saying, no problem, you've got the legal right to this data, but I'll see you in 3 years. So we've run across some of that as well in our travels in open data. So I thought it's cool when open data and the struggles of open data is in the news. That doesn't happen all the time. So we see, if I could summarize why we care about data and open data at Hockeystick. For us, it's about performance. So yes, there's a lot of societal benefits from having more data, and in general, I think more open is better. But very, very specifically for us, we see it as, how can we use data to help people perform better? And by people, I mean, all the people in the private market, investors, accelerators like Communitech or hubs like Communitech, the angel investor community, the government, and obviously companies themselves. So I think, using data, we can achieve better performance. And it's, even though this entire presentation and our kind of focuses on the private market, I kind of want to remind everyone that we're not making this stuff up in terms of the usefulness of data for markets. Like all of you in the room who've ever bought a share of a company or an ETF or a mutual fund, you would never consider doing that if you couldn't go to Yahoo Finance and have the comfort of knowing that you can get all the financial statements, all the secondary analysis. That's just table stakes, right? So that's how the public market works. In the private market, if I want to invest in a company which, smaller, riskier, there's a greater chance of failure statistically. If I want to know how that company's performing and I want some data, I have to go get it, usually from the CEO of that company. So from my experience as an angel, if I want to know, hey, how are you doing financially, I've got to go get the information, do my own due diligence. I even had a situation once where one of the companies I invested in went out of business, but I didn't know that, because how would I know that? And I found out because they changed their LinkedIn profile, and that's how I knew, right? So that's life in the private market. But it doesn't have to be that way. So not going to bore you with finance today, don't worry. But there are some concepts we can take from finance. For me, performance and alpha are kind of the same thing. And the idea that like alpha is the measurement of how a fund manager or portfolio manager performs relative to his or her kind of peers or benchmark. So basically it's saying that if you're running a VC fund and you had a 3x return on your fund, you may have made yourself happy and your investors happy, but they wouldn't be so happy if all the rest of the VCs in the industry were returning 10x. So alpha is really a measure of kind of your relative performance, and it's something that we don't have this in the private market because we don't have those benchmarks. And I think those benchmarks, if we do our job right at Hockeystick, we're going to start contributing those benchmarks. This graph here is something from BDC research. The top line is the Cambridge Associates kind of average IRR, internal rate of return for American VCs. The bottom is the kind of the best guess at what the Canadian VCs are returning. Two things. One is there is no Canadian benchmark, so I think that's something we can work on. And obviously, you're going to look at this and say, well, it was negative for many years, it's now positive, but it still lags the US. But the point here is not that all Canadian VCs should be compared against US VCs. There's a lot of differences. It's that if you're running a fund and you don't have the underlying benchmark, you don't have the ability to calculate alpha. You just have kind of your own siloed returns. And I think we can probably do better than that. But it's not just for VCs. It's not just, in fact, it's not just about financial returns. If I asked Rob here and said, hey, Rob, what's important to Communitech? Is it just, cash on cash financial returns? He'd say, no, you're crazy. It's a lot more than that. It's long-term, it's education, it's jobs, it's community development, it's research that might not pay off for decades. So there's a lot of other kind of outputs that amazing organizations like Communitech can throw off. So that can be jobs, it can be really any metric. The finance people might disagree with applying concepts like alpha to non-financial metrics, but the same things apply. If you don't have the benchmarks, you really can't tell your own story. So, Communitech may be telling a very different story than, let's say, a small accelerator somewhere else in Canada. But it's still difficult to tell the amazing story of Communitech without comparing, other like local economic indicators, national indicators, international indicators. There's a lot. So just kind of expand the scope so we're not just talking about making money. We're talking about open data, and one thing in our own journey looking at corporate data, meaning kind of the basket of data around private corporations, is that, first of all, it's whoever called it the private market really did everyone a disservice, because there's this kind of weird thing where it's private and everyone gets confused, like, oh, just by, I haven't really thought about it, so by default, everything should be private. But in the UK and in many countries in the EU, small private companies are still required to submit financial information, a lot more information than we do in Canada and the United States. They submit that annually to the government, and it's public. So if you wanted to know Hockeystick's revenues, you could go and search. I think there's, in some countries, you have to be above a certain level, but in general, their attitude is, it's not going to hurt the companies to have their revenues public. It's going to help suppliers, it's going to help investors, and it's going to help the whole market. And last time I checked, the UK economy didn't completely collapse for this reason. So it's interesting that we shouldn't assume that that things are more open in Canada and the United States. In fact, we're lagging behind other countries when it comes to how open private data is, and there are consequences of that. I was talking about the idea of it being called a private market. I actually think maybe we should rename it to be called the growth market to kind of eliminate that idea that somehow private means you should have less stuff, you should have less data. And a lot of the times when we are negotiating with people to release data, we're thinking about ourselves, like how much data should we be asking for? We kind of come up with this weird situation where we're asking ourselves, well, what really should be secret? And in a private company, I look at Hockeystick, maybe some of our trade secrets, our future plans, our IP, but a lot of stuff within Hockeystick is not really secret. It's just maybe we prefer that everyone in the room doesn't know that. But even in private, there's multiple levels of private. There's private meaning, Hockeystick should have the right to disclose what it wants to. And then there's private where it seems to be open, but it's just hard to get to. right? And I'll give you an example of that, which is the GST registry. So I'm going to go into more detail in a second about this, but so right now I can, if I wanted to find the business number of Canadian companies, it's very difficult to find. But one thing we found in particular that's kind of weird is that if you know the GST number, which is the same as the business number of a Canadian company, you can search the corporate, one of the databases federally, which is not open, but it's available, and I can get a bunch of information about the company, but I can't go the other way around. So if I know the name of the company, but I don't know that they have a GST number, I can't get the GST number. So somebody made a decision that one way should be convenient, the other way should be inconvenient. But they're not saying that it should be secret or private. They're just saying that, for some reason, if you know the GST number, you should be able to find out if it's real. But if you're doing business with a company and you don't know the GST number, we're not going to tell you what it is. So we see a lot of those kind of cases where things are kind of, there's some weird decisions being made, let's just say. Going back to, going one level deeper into the corporate registry space, so you'll see this in the public database I'm going to show you, but we just wanted to know, is there a single identifier that we can use for companies in Canada? And outside of Canada, it's different. We obviously started with the business number or the incorporation number. In Canada, you can incorporate federally or provincially. So we've incorporated federally, so if you go to Corporations Canada, you can look up my name, address, all that kind of stuff. But if you incorporated provincially, you're still a valid Canadian corporation, but your data is in the Ontario registry, which is behind a paywall. And it's one of only 4 provinces in Canada currently that have some kind of lack of openness. So you can't search it for free. And it kind of boggles the mind, I think, why it should be behind a paywall, because the whole point of corporate records is so that it makes it easier for people to do business with each other and do their due diligence. So the point is that even in Canada, not all of this data is available, which makes it very hard to assemble a big picture. So this is what we were trying to do, is trying to simply see, for all incorporated companies in Canada, I'd say 99% of whom we know have a business number, because if you don't, you can't sell in Canada and you can't have a payroll, right? So it's a great idea in theory. So we found that, okay, we can't get it from the CRA database because they don't allow you to search company names and get a business number in return. Corporations Canada, which is part of ICED, it's great. They're very open. All their data is open. So if you search Hockeystick, you can get our GST number. And then we'll send you a bill. So that's great. But for the other 80%, you can't do that. So there's actually, even though, it's kind of frustrating, because even though the data is out there, we can't get it. And since we can't get it, we can't do the job we want to do, to have a single place where, if you want to ask yourself a question, does somebody have a business number, or, hey, I've got a database and I want to match against your database, and business number being the best way to do that, I can't do that. So obviously we do fuzzy matching, we apply other kind of data principles to get the best match we can, but we haven't found a reason why it can't be open, right? So hopefully we'll be working on that. So what we spend our time doing is, yes, we spend a lot of time with government, knocking on doors, getting them to release data. I think in general, even though I may be throwing Ontario under the bus a little bit, but in general, I think government is doing a great job. They do have a open data first kind of policy, and we've seen it in action. So, like us, they're resource constrained. So I think that the trend is looking good, and most government departments we've talked to have said, in theory, we agree, and in fact, the law says that this should be open. It's going to take some time, and that makes sense. But we're not waiting for the government to kind of do it all for us. One of the reasons that we decided to build this open database was that we figure if we can do it together as a community, and if Hockeystick can kind of put some resources into it, then partly we don't need the government to do everything for us, and partly we'll also act as kind of a bit of a fire, let's say, that we can light under people who are just on the edge of starting to release open data, maybe need that extra push. Okay, so I wanted to kind of just set the stage a little bit about why we're doing some of the things we're doing and our background. I I'm going to give you the first kind of sneak peek about this actual open database we're doing. I'm going to show you the user interface, so you might think, oh, it's, the user interface is not the data, but I think it tells the story of the kind of scope of what we're doing. Is that playing? Yeah. Okay, so I'll pause it a few times so that we can dig into it. But so this is really the kind of the home page of this project. You can see that don't make fun of the fact that there are not 844 VCs. We totally understand that. This is kind of a demo database dump. But what we're trying to do here is map every single company and investor and government program in Canada. So on the one hand, it's a very ambitious goal. It's never been done before. On the other hand, it's achievable. There's not millions and millions and millions of different funds, for example. There's, in the hundreds of private funders and in the thousands of government funders. So it's achievable. It's just never been in one place. So what we're trying to do is, we think that every person in Canada and every person who's interested in investing in Canada should be able to go to a website like this and just see like how big and how vibrant is this ecosystem, how many investors are there, what's happening on a quarterly, monthly, daily basis, and this is just the beginning. So the visualization widgets that you're seeing here are really just the tip of the iceberg. I'd love to hear at the end some of your thoughts and feedback on what we could do on the UI side. So we're doing some of the standard things like really mapping, segmenting, counting the ecosystem. I think that's very important for all of the efforts I've seen. And frankly, a lot of them are duplicate efforts of recounting, reclassifying, deduping data. So what we're trying to do is provide a single dashboard for the entire community. And I think it'll be super useful to everybody here in this room, whether you're an investor, company, or you work in government. We are providing, drill down capability right to the company or fund. So if the company has data that is open about it, and they've disclosed things like their funding history, they could even disclose their revenue. There's no rule against that. Whatever people want to disclose, they can. That's going to be in the database. So we're trying to do more than just simple legal identifiers and things like that, although that's where we're starting because that's also a problem we need to solve. Built into the database is a pretty sophisticated taxonomy. I'm going to actually talk you through that in a little bit. But what you're looking at here is the advanced search. So you'll see it's going to go by pretty quickly, but we've kind of anticipated a lot of the things that people would want to search for. If you're searching for an angel group, you might want to search the region they operate in. If you're searching, same with an accelerator. Maybe you want to search on cohort intake dates for accelerators. For a VC, how old is their fund? Because, as you probably know, it's better to fundraise with a fund that's earlier in their cycle than, in years 5 to 7. So the point here is that we're providing a lot of tools. All of this is going to be free. We want to provide the maximum value so that if one piece of data is added to this database, it falls into a very nice structure, but it's super valuable for anyone searching for that piece of data. Not only for funders who I think are going to use the database to find those of you in the room who are entrepreneurs. The search costs for funders are still very high, but the flip side, the search costs for entrepreneurs looking for funding is also very high. And this is going to be the first database that has information on angels, accelerators, venture, PE, debt funds, government, all in one place, all 100% free to the entrepreneur. So it's something that we're always frustrated with how difficult it is for entrepreneurs to get funding and to find funding. And there's a huge cost to that, roadshow that you have to get out there and do. So it's going to be a pretty cool database. It's going to have a lot of the search tools that you expect. Let me just fast forward a little bit. So there's you can stack queries. So you're basically building up a SQL query here, but using a visual interface. So it's designed to be used by anybody, and of course there'll be APIs and other ways to access the data as well. But you can get a sense that on the UI front it's pretty advanced. On the back end, which I'm happy to also go into details about, it's also pretty advanced. And we obviously spent a lot of time making sure the platform was right. So it's not just a promotional website, it's a real database. Okay, cool. So at launch, these change every day, every minute. But in terms of what we're launching with, it's the majority of the VCs in Canada, both the GPs and the funds, all of the angel groups, the majority of the accelerators, and by accelerators we mean accelerators, incubators, hubs, co-working spaces, between 8 to 10,000 transactions, so investment transactions, deals that have been publicly announced, and creeping closer to about 1,000 funding programs. Most of those are federal. We're working on provincial as well. If anyone has any ideas on great databases of provincial or municipal funding programs, please let me know, and I'll give you a t-shirt. Our goal is nothing short of having every private company in Canada on this platform, every funder, and eventually service providers, just anything where open data can be useful. And by the way, we don't know, we don't have the answer to everything. We don't know, we haven't thought about everything that open data can do. That's the amazing thing about open data, is that you don't have to be the smartest person in the room and have all the ideas. It's a community effort. So, but it's going to be a pretty significant data repository, at launch. So that's what the team is busily working on right now. How we got that data, we have our own research team that has scoured every publicly available source. And we'll just pause there for a second and say that this is not, you probably have used Crunchbase, and that's probably the number one kind of crowdsourced database on private companies. It's very different than Crunchbase in this sense that in Crunchbase, it's anyone can write to that database, and it's kind of, the idea is that enough eyeballs get to it, the data eventually is accurate, which is kind of true, kind of not true. With the Hockeystick database, every piece of data in the database has to have a source and an attribution, and you'll be able to see that. So you'll see the date it was added, who added it. Right now it's just us, but you'll see a link to another public source. So that could be a Corporations Canada database, it could be a tweet, a blog post from the company, it could be a funding announcement. There's actually a ton of data, unstructured up until now, about transactions in Canada. That's what we've done to organize it. But just to reassure people that we don't have the right to buy private databases and then release data, because we can't be 100% certain that it should be in the public domain. So other sources, I mentioned open databases. If you are a kind of a legal owner or officer of an organization like Communitech, or you're a company, or you're a fund, you have the exclusive right to release data into the public database associated with you. So kind of like, if you own the entity, you have the right to publish into the database. Nobody else does. So that's an open invitation to everyone in this room and listening on the stream that, if you're a company, contact us. We'll show you the data we have about you. We want you to make it better. We want it to be accurate. It's voluntary, but I think the more people contribute, the better it's going to be. And this data is open. I want to stress that it's not filed away in some secret place, and we're not selling it. So it'll be released under an open data license. The crowdsourcing thing, I put a question mark because it's still an open question. It's something that I'd like to ask the community about, because we've really struggled with this, kind of debated this idea of, should we allow crowdsourced kind of data input? Because obviously the reason for doing it is you got way more researchers than we can hire on Upwork or something like that. But it also means that on the downside, it could mean that people write and publish things that are associated with a company that maybe the company doesn't like. So other people have solved that in other ways, like Wikipedia, obviously, but it's an open question. So we're not doing it right now, but we'd love to hear your feedback and your ideas if we haven't thought about a way to get better data. The actual disclosure system, meaning you log in, you authenticate, and you can release data, that's not finished yet. So right now, it's what you see on the website is exclusively coming through Hockeystick and other open databases, but we can do it manually. So if you contact us and we can verify you kind of more manually, if you're the CEO of the company or an officer of the company, you'll be able to publish. Okay. I'm trying to go quickly because I've got a lot to get through, so sorry about that. But I am going to talk a bit about the taxonomy. I'm going to do the thing they tell you never to do in a presentation, which is actually look at a spreadsheet. So, but it is multicolored, so that's designed to keep you awake. But I wanted to tell you that the taxonomy, which by the way we're going to be open sourcing, so I don't know, it may just be a Google Sheet that people can comment on, but I wanted to talk you through the process for us to build up this taxonomy, because when we had this idea of building up this database, the first thing we realized was, well, there's got to be a standard out there. Somebody must have invented a standard for classifying and describing private companies, and it's got to be out there, so I just Googled it. And it doesn't exist, unfortunately. There's no kind of official standard, nothing that's been adopted. The closest one we found is something called Alt Exchange, which is a kind of private equity standard, but it's not really used that much, unfortunately. So what we decided to do was start building up our data science team started building up our own taxonomy, but we started looking at, okay, for each segment that we serve, what are the standards that those people are actually using? So if I go to venture capital, you can see that we looked at PitchBook, just as a kind of de facto standard people are using, Crunchbase. A lot of this stuff is just published, and Gust, less so in venture. We did look at Alt Exchange for companies, so you can see here, we kind of analyzed all the different descriptors they used, and then tried to map it to descriptors used by other products, and then mapped it to our own taxonomy. So the reason we did that was it doesn't, who cares if Hockeystick invents another standard and nobody's going to use it, and it's difficult to map to what's already out there. So actual industry practice is really important to us. But we also took a kind of view that just because people use it doesn't mean it's good. And so we did take a critical view to building up a really good taxonomy. So you'll notice on the side here with these crazy colors, it's everything from basic contact information. You know what? I'll look at I'll do an angel group one because it's a bit more specific. Yeah. Oh. Okay. I know why. Don't worry, you didn't miss anything. It was me scrolling around a spreadsheet. Right. Okay. Okay, cool. So, okay, I'm not going to do that. I know it's hard to read too, so just go with it for a second. So if I go to Angel Group, you'll notice that the top blocks here, contact info, address, kind of basic stuff, that's all standardized across the whole database, obviously. But you've got different descriptors for accelerators. There's different types of accelerators. There's accelerators that also invest. There's accelerators that have angel groups associated with them. So it's not as black and white as we originally thought. The sectors that people invest in, some accelerators are structured as nonprofit, some are private, some are legally, there's a legal organization, some are ad hoc. So we try to customize this part of the taxonomy for every entity based on industry practices. And we thought that's a better approach than trying to shove accelerators into venture capital into angel, and so on. The one that's probably most standard is the company. So you've got everything from baskets of identifiers broken out by geography, description. Really the main kind of controversial one is industry sectors, because the world is divided into two: people who love the North American industry classification system and people who hate it. And usually the people who hate it are the people who are asked to input the data. But when we looked at just that particular controversial subject, we kind of realized that it's not that people hate NAICS and it's a great classification system, it's the standard. It's that if you're an AI company, you're not in NAICS, or you're in it, but at a very low resolution. So we started looking at industry practice. What are the kind of verticals or sectors, common practice, fintech, AI, etc. And when we looked at what other organizations and investors were doing, many of whom are already using Hockeystick, so we could actually look at their surveys and things like that, we didn't find a ton of variation that we thought it's enough to go crazy on. It's more that, okay, some people have AI in their group, in their sector, some don't. That's an easy problem to solve. So I haven't gone into a lot of detail about this, but a lot of what we do at Hockeystick is do meetings with multiple parties to try to get them to come to agreement that, you know, an FTE means X number of hours. And I would say that effort is not done. We haven't solved that problem, but you know, the process for this taxonomy is we're going to release it. We're going to ask for comments, and we invite and expect debate on the taxonomy. It's more important to us that people get a chance to, you know, beat the crap out of it than we get to take credit for coming up with the best taxonomy. But my dream for this taxonomy is that starting in a few weeks, if you're building a database of startups or you're building an app, let's say, that has something to do with our industry, you use this taxonomy as kind of the best that we have right now and you contribute to it. That would be amazing. Okay, so let me go back here. And yeah. Okay, so another couple of things. The Hockeystick is kind of unique, right? Everyone says that, but we truly are. That we actually are. We combine open data with non-open data. So for us, it's like open is better, but there's many uses and many cases when private proprietary data is useful. So you can see here that in the middle of it is open data. So our entire database, everything is structured around the taxonomy of the open database. But we also work with what we call community data. So that means data within a community that is shared. So an example for us is we're the data platform for the Canadian Venture Capital Association. So all the VCs in Canada have agreed that, you know, we're going to use one platform, one standard, so we can share deal data, we can establish benchmarks, etc. So they are hosted on Hockeystick, but their data is not released publicly. But what it allows us to do is we can kind of vertically align data from the open database and the CVCA database so that it benefits, you know, those VCs who are investing in the same companies that are in the public database. They don't need to do all that data entry. They can dedupe it, etc. But it also gives us the opportunity to encourage those VCs who are already announcing a lot of these deals publicly to hit a button and say, hey, this subset of my deal information I want to put into the public database because I'm doing it in a press release anyways. It's just unstructured or structured. So that's something that Hockeystick is increasingly playing a role there. And there's multiple communities. There's NACO on the angel side. There's groups of a big group of accelerators, incubators, and co-working spaces that are getting together talking about shared metrics. There's the government itself. So there's a lot of different communities, and we've had a lot of success getting them onto one platform. And the reason is because we can say your data is here and the open data is separate. There's another layer which is completely private. So if you go on Hockeystick and you have an account and you could have an amazing private database that you created yourself, you can upload it onto Hockeystick, take advantage of the fact that it aligns with the other data on it, but it doesn't, you're not releasing your private data when you use Hockeystick. Okay. Okay, so one other thing I wanted to talk about, kind of that's unique, kind of novel about Hockeystick. I didn't really talk about our tools and platform before, but you know, it's great to build an open database, great to launch with it, great to hire a bunch of people to build it, but it doesn't matter if it's going to go stale, which every other, you know, open database project has. So for us, we only did this because we have ways to keep the data fresh. So we already have, you know, tens of thousands of companies using Hockeystick, hundreds of funds, and we use those relationships so that when, you know, a company is, let's say, using Hockeystick to report to their investors, send their financial statements, applying to an accelerator, storing their cap table, or using a launch spot here at Communitech, it means that, you know, while keeping all of the data 100% confidential and private and owned by the user, we can still allow the user to make the choice of, do I want some of this information to be public? And we're going to encourage them to do that. For example, when you sign up on Hockeystick, and you enter your address, and everything will compare it with what's in the public database and say, hey, we've noticed some discrepancies. Would you like to update it with the version that you know to be accurate? So this is kind of the key to how we're keeping the database refreshed. It's really tapping into tools that companies and funds and ecosystem players are using already. We're not forcing anyone to do this, but in our experience and our testing, people have been very, very open to contributing data because they know what happens when their data is stuck in somebody's old CRM. It's inaccurate and it doesn't do them any favors anyways. So there's both open data sources, self-disclosure, tapping into apps. We're adding more and more apps into the ecosystem. So this is a totally unique way of doing things, and I think it's going to have a lot of success. So I showed you, I kind of talked about the why at the beginning, but I did want to focus just on 3 reasons why we did this. Number one is I do think it's extremely valuable to have a centralized place where there's kind of a view of our ecosystem, because there's so many different opinions about our ecosystem, what it's doing, what it's not doing, and it's great. The Canadian tech ecosystem is growing. It's never been more dynamic, but that's just me telling you that, right? I'd like you to be able to have a way to measure that for yourself, and maybe to see, here in Waterloo, let's measure that vibrancy and let's make sure that we keep it vibrant. So I think centralization is really important. Standardization is something that when we first started this project, we didn't think that, oh my God, I want to, when I grow up, I want to develop standards. But it ended up being like we couldn't solve any problem without building the standards and taxonomy. And so that's why I said we spent a lot of time kind of advocating, hey, jump on this standard. If you don't like it, please help make it better. And it's more important that it be shared. And the last one is performance, right? We're doing this not just because we're nice people and we want it to be more open. It's that we want better performing companies and a better performing ecosystem. And I will take this moment to say that, that one thing that we found that kind of always bothers me is that, there's lots of people, I think, collecting data about our community. And I think I would just say, without, identifying them individually, I'd say, if you're collecting data, please contribute it back to the community, right? So something obviously we're doing, but I feel like, every time I hear somebody say, we're collecting all this amazing data, we have this incredible stats, we've got these incredible benchmarks, just give us all your data and we'll eventually give you the output of it. I feel like, why don't you contribute back, right? Let's all share. We're not competing with each other. So, that's my kind of soapbox moment of just, I think that there's no reason for secrecy and when it comes to the performance of our information and the performance of our ecosystem. All the people in this room own, you own your own data. So if anyone tells you, hey, give us all your data, we're going to do stuff with it, you should be very careful about that. Our master plan is first we have to launch, which is we're really excited by. We're very confident. And I'd say what we're launching with is going to be a great database, great UI, great taxonomy. But I would say that the real purpose of this launch is it's a call to action. So we will have failed if we've got this great database, even if people use it, but people aren't contributing. So that's really important for us, and that's the thing that we're launching, is this idea of open shared data that everyone can benefit from. We're then going to get feedback. I was going to put it in quotes because not all feedback is nice. So it's an open invitation to disagree, say, that part of the taxonomy sucks and this is why. That's the scientific quote-unquote method. So we do invite, especially the people here at ODX and in this community, you guys are the experts as well. The third part of the not secret plan anymore is really building the tools to transfer ownership to the actual companies. And I'll tell you that the biggest problem here is the lack of a digital identity management system for corporations. So that kind of exists for people, the photo and the driver's license, the AML KYC stuff, but it's really difficult to do for corporations. I know there's some blockchain stuff happening, so now I said blockchain, so I feel good. So again, if somebody here in this room is a digital corporate identity expert, we'll give you a t-shirt. So that's what we're planning to do. And more importantly, I know I've kind of beat this horse a little bit, but I mean it when I say that if you are listening to this presentation, and if you're here, and I'm sure that you work at a company, work in an organization, work at a fund, please volunteer to contribute your data that you want to be public to the public database. We will show you what we have about you. It may be nothing, it may be amazing stuff, or it may be inaccurate. That's the whole point. So it really, you can really move the needle here. We do want feedback, so if there are database experts and kind of taxonomy experts here, in a couple weeks you'll have the ability to comment, and we may even form kind of like a working group around the taxonomy, so amazing if you can do that. And obviously we don't know every data source. Every day we're discovering new data sources, things we didn't think about. So if you have a data source or you want to suggest one, please come talk to me afterwards, because like I said, we're at the starting line. So we're launching the beginning of what we think is going to be a great project, and that depends as much on you guys as it does on Hockeystick. That's it for me for what I wanted to go through. I know I really blasted through that quickly, but I know you can handle it because you're all smart. And if you have any questions, comments, I don't know how we do it online, but I'm sure somebody will figure that out. Yeah, I'm here, and feel free to ask any questions.
Does part of the taxonomy deal with whether it was what the organization is a corporation or a private, sole proprietorship,
yeah.
different business models that would still have a GST number, business number?
Yeah. So the question. So the question in the back was whether or not the taxonomy includes different types of different types of organization. So a corporation, limited partnership, sole proprietor, nonprofit, charity, and it does. So that's the research that we did. Is there's a list of legal formation types. So yeah, it does. It covers all of that. We're heavily concentrated on corporations, but it supports all of that. And the one interesting exception to that is the pre-incorporated accelerator participants. So often people coming through Velocity or one of the earlier stage programs, you're not incorporated yet. You're not a sole proprietorship. You're not a partnership. You're two people with an idea. So we call that a pre-incorporated project, like a terrible name, but it's a project. Some of those projects will become companies, some of them won't. So that's something where it's not a legal identifier, it's kind of a hockey stick identifier. Yeah?
Does the taxonomy have the complexity to handle multiple values or conflicting values for an attribute?
Yeah, great question. So the yes on the taxonomy and yes on the data, the data model database itself. So we accept and we expect that there will be disagreement in the data. So ultimately the company, let's say a really hardcore example of a business number, there's not going to be disagreement there, and the company and I guess the government is kind of the co-owners of that number. But for a lot of other things, like let's say how much money a company raised, there is disagreement about that, because let's say one investor will say we invested $4 million, but maybe $1 million of that was a convertible note. Which is it part of the investment? From the company side, it is. From the VC side, it may be. From the lawyer's or accountant's perspective, it's not. It's a loan. So it's designed to there can be multiple versions of the truth. And I know that goes against me trying to get to a single source of truth, but it's just reality that, until there is a single cap table that's public, there's going to be disagreement. But in fact, even in that example, it's not just, legal piece of paper saying, is it right or is it wrong? It's just, different, like somebody who's measuring, like Communitech measuring how much outside capital did we help the company raise. Communitech doesn't care whether it was a convertible note, a safe, or a preferred share, right? But somebody, measuring, let's say, hardcore financial performance of a venture fund does care. So I think sometimes it's not just black and white. It's more, it is a matter of interpretation. Yeah. Yeah.
So how will organizations like Communitech onboard their companies to
Yeah, so the question was, would organizations like Communitech onboard their companies to get onto this database? Definitely. And in the case of, this is what's been great about working with Rob and LaunchSpot is that, between Hockeystick and LaunchSpot, many of the organizations in Canada are already using one of our products for various reasons. So whether it's, within Communitech or whether it's you're applying for funding at an angel group so I think, the other part of our business and what we do is to get our tools used by as many people, which is helpful for us as a business, but it also means that it's a channel to those companies. And we're trying to always be mindful of the entrepreneur's time. So I could send survey after survey after survey to every entrepreneur in Canada and just drive them crazy. But if they already applied to Communitech, they already provided some information, and I just said, hey, by the way, we'd like to take a small subset of what you've just done. And by the way, we've matched it. Maybe we pre-filled the application form for you, so we gave you some value. That would be crazy. If we did that, then maybe we can incentivize you to help populate this database. And then eventually what we want to do to create even more value is, maybe you're raising money, you're raising funding, and using the data we have both publicly and privately, maybe we can one day say, hey, we found some awesome sources of funding that you would have never known about because they're not in your city, they haven't been announced, they're difficult to find. So there's a lot of things I think we can do. We don't have to build all those things, by the way, but it's some of the ideas we've been thinking about is to, the idea is let's bring more value to the entrepreneur. So it's not, please give us your stuff, period. Like that's the underpants kind of thing. Like, please give us your underpants, ? Profit. So I'm assuming everyone understands that cartoon, right? So I didn't just make that up. That's real. Yeah, okay. I didn't draw that. It came from South Park, right? Any questions online or any? No? Hey.
Are you a GDPR?
So as a organization, we've just gone through the enjoyable experience of being GDPR compliant. We also gone through a SOC 2 Type 1, Type 2. We do every 90 days we have, I say this with a smile because it's, it's better to smile when you're talking about security audits. But we do every 90 days vulnerability penetration testing. And so we do a lot, but that's more because we work with government. So it's a very secure platform. I actually don't think GDPR applies to this open database, even though it falls under our organization because we're not storing personally identifiable information about individuals. That's not already in the public domain. So if we get, you can get my name from Corporations Canada because I'm an officer director of a corporation. So that wouldn't fall under GDPR. But if we, let's say, started tracking individuals and some of those individuals are EU citizens, then we have to. And in general, I'm a big fan of GDPR because I think that's, as citizens, why should we not have better privacy controls? It's the way the world is going. Canada is lagging a bit behind. So there's been some discussion about accelerating that process. You had a question at the back? Oh, okay. 2 GDPR questions. Wow, that's amazing. Yeah.
Feedback on your dashboard. One of the things with information presentation is this kind of moving away from, well, can I be, right? Here?
Yeah.
Do away with the pie charts.
Okay.
Right? So the slices are going to end up being too small and hard to manage. That can just be converted to a bar.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, so the comment was we should get rid of the pie. It's below here. Get rid of the pie chart, replace it. What's great is just the libraries can do anything, so we're still tinkering. But I do have a question for the room, actually, that's very controversial inside Hockeystick. And it goes something like this. So some people, like including the CEO, believe that a darker color scheme, such as what you see here, is better. Okay? So I just say, totally objectively speaking, some people, including the CEO, believe it's better. And then other people, including Laura, that's Laura there, Senior Marketing Manager, believe that it's too dark and that we should have a light theme, as other people have done. And so I'm just really curious, how am I doing this? I'm just really curious, Be honest, be frank, show of hands. Who thinks that okay, so I'm going to ask you two things. One, I'm going to say, raise your hand if you think the dark color scheme that the CEO believes is good. And the other is, do you believe the lighter scheme would be better because this sucks?
I control who gets t-shirts.
That's coercion, but you know what? You gotta do what you have to do. Okay, so who thinks the dark scheme is better or is good? Okay, some people. How many people think it's too dark, it should be lighter? Laura, your hand does not count, but I think generally more people think light. Some people didn't put their hand up. So, is there a way to do a poll online? Yeah, okay, we'll do a Twitter poll because we are literally debating this every single day. Where it's like, well, it's like me on one side and the entire company on the other. But I am open to being convinced, and I think it might need to go a bit lighter. So, you've been part of an important decision. If this ends up being orange or something, it's your fault. So. On that note, thank you very much for your time. I'm around hanging out, so feel free to come talk to me. There were some calls to action, so we're going to take that seriously. And please, if you can contribute to this project, please do. Thank you.